Alright, let's not waste any time. So the government prints money, the value of money goes down, and the price of everything else goes up. Not a problem if you've already invested into assets your entire life, but we made the mistake of not being born earlier. This is what happens when money isn't scarce, and we expect this to continue because no government really has a solution to this. Even if they balance their budgets for a while, it never really lasts. On the other hand, if your money was scarce, it would actually go up over time because things get more efficient, we produce more goods and services, and if you have the same max amount of money for all of those, eventually you can just buy more with less money. That's where Bitcoin comes in. Right now, its protocol is running on a bunch of computers all across the world. It's being secured by the most powerful network of computational power ever created. It's not run by any government, and it happens to be the best performing asset in history. It's a currency with a fixed max supply of 21 million. It cannot be printed, and it cannot be stopped. In this video, I'm not going to go into detail on how Bitcoin works. I'm going to explain why it's very important and why it shouldn't be ignored. So here's a good question. How does the world change if the money that everybody is using is scarce? Well, I can tell you one huge way it changes: no more war. An offensive war cannot happen without money printing. Governments don't have any other way to fund war other than money printing. They're not able to go door to door and ask people, hey, we're trying to invade this country. Can you give us some cash? It's just not a thing that they can do. The only reason they can start wars is because they can spend money that they don't have, and we get to all pay the price through taxation and inflation later down on the line. But since Bitcoin can't be created on the spot, it can't be used to fund a war. Beyond that, Bitcoin makes saving and investing very simple. Right now, you can't save money because inflation is going to make it all worthless the longer you save just the cash. So you have to put it into something. That's why houses are money. That's why metals are money. That's why you got to invest in something like stocks or bonds. Buying anything is better than just keeping your money and letting it inflate away. But if the money was good, we could just keep the money. And then all of a sudden, something's a little different here. Houses aren't money. Houses are houses. They're for living in. Metals are metals. They're for manufacturing or wearing or whatever else we want to do with metals. And stocks, yeah, stocks are just stocks. They just are what they are, but nobody is in a huge rush to stick all their money into it just to live. And all of those things are still going to have value, but the urgency of taking your money and sticking it into something else is going to be gone, which means all of those other things are going to be cheaper. Speaking of making things cheaper, let's talk about Bitcoin as an investment. So a question you might have is, why would I choose Bitcoin and not any of the other cryptocurrencies that exist? Well, money is a winner-take-all game, and I'm happy to say Bitcoin has already won. This is because its fundamentals as a currency are the most solid, and it's already had years to grow its network and user base ahead of any other project. Bitcoin has the most actually decentralized network of nodes and everybody running the code, and the biggest and most decentralized mining infrastructure of people securing the network around the world. Because it's actually decentralized, nobody can just change how Bitcoin works without getting the consensus of all those people running all those nodes. And the guy who made it, Satoshi Nakamoto, well, nobody really knows who he is. And at this point, it really doesn't matter because there's nothing he can do about the project. It's out of his hands. It's now up to the decentralized network to run itself. He couldn't change the code. He's just like any other user. Contrast this with something like Ethereum that has a dedicated dev team and that makes changes to Ethereum's code and does hard forks way too often. Other cryptocurrencies, they're either way too centralized, don't have the mining infrastructure to keep things secure, or just haven't been stress tested with enough users. Some of them are just actual scams where the guy just comes up with a coin, makes a bunch of promises, mines a bunch of it ahead of time, and then dumps it on the market and uses that profit usually to buy Bitcoin. This is why crypto is an absolute joke, and Bitcoin is the only thing that matters. Don't get those two things mixed up. So let's compare Bitcoin to some other investment options. Real estate is pretty nice. If you don't want to job your whole life to paying rent, but you still have to job your whole life to paying property taxes, you got to maintain the house and that's expensive, and getting into that market for someone like me just seems unreasonable nowadays. What about just stocks or index funds, stuff like that? You can get a pretty good long-term return out of these things, but look at that return and compare it with inflation because it's actually going to be less than you think once you take that into account. Plus, If we're talking long-term returns, I don't think those beat Bitcoin. What about gold or other metals? Well, there's always the problem that if you don't buy it physically, you don't actually know if what you bought even exists. And if you do buy it physically, it's not very liquid, it's very hard to move around, it's very hard to spend and use as a currency. Bitcoin is online and very easy to spend and is basically integrated with the actual tech stack that the world runs on. With Bitcoin, you can send or receive it from anywhere to anywhere with no restrictions, and the final settlement is quicker than a bank transfer, with no bank. But of course, the real kicker here is the fact that over the long term, Bitcoin has outperformed every single other asset. The only problem is the volatility. If you look at Bitcoin's price chart, it's going up and down, it's all over the place, and that can be tough to go through if you're trying to hold on to your Bitcoin through all of that time. But there is an easy solution to this. If you dollar cost average your extra income into Bitcoin, at the same time, you can dollar cost average your knowledge into Bitcoin. So you have to really understand Bitcoin in order to be confident enough to watch the price drop down way lower than you're comfortable with and just chill, sit back and be like, yeah, no, I know what this is all about. I know how this works. I know that nothing has changed in the fundamentals of this. I'm just going to keep stacking and it'll go back up. We know it's going to happen. The boomers had their cheap real estate, but we have Bitcoin. And you might look at the current price and especially compare it with a while back and think, oh man, that's just so high. But we've only just begun. Adoption is still very early in this process. And so we still have a long way to go. And you don't have to buy a lot either. You could start out with $100, $50, even less than that. But keep in mind, the price might not be this low for very long. Sometimes it's easy to think that things that were easy in the past are now just impossible. Do you want to be able to buy a home? Do you want to be able to start a family? Maybe you just want to sort of opt out of this financial system that wants to inflate all of your money away and that put you into debt before you were even born. If you're looking for the chance at true freedom, I think Bitcoin is the way. It's not just an asset, it's a lifeboat on the edge of the Titanic. And I'm hopping in.